G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talk Stuff. And today we're talking about the war on reality. Now, it's gone beyond rules for thee. It is now reached a point where there's no truth but power. We cannot agree on a shared collective truth in society because of a fundamental shift in society. It's not just the demographics, but there are many who blindly obey while accusing the other side of being a cult. Now, the problem is, so many of today's youth consume only fragments and make the assumption that that is all they need to know because that is all they do in school, is get told that's all you need to know. So when you raise children to only answer the few test questions, they only think that's what matters. And because they're prioritized to tribal belonging over objective facts, you will always see The Guardian and other liberal outlets always talking about truth and here's the facts, but those are words without meaning. It's toxic behavior to engage in, let's say what it is, propaganda. Now, before I continue, Empire Vels, that's Empire Vels, one word, myshopify.com, your one-stop shop for fantasy-themed. Well, it is based on my writing, the Empire Vels series, by me, David Applegate, author of the books ProWritingAid, Power Games, Into the Earthbound, and the erotic tales from the Empire. So what's happening with society? Why can't we agree? Well, it starts with the algorithmic-driven echo chambers. We no longer consume regulated media. If CBS, ABC, or any news outlets, even CNN, once upon a time, if they had to make sure they had sources and facts and proof. When things started to fall apart was the accusations against Nixon. Now, it's gotten only worse with the digitization of news, where we no longer watch the half-hour news and get the summary of today's events. Instead, you have fragments, and algorithms track trends. Your clicks are constantly moderated and modified. Now, you may say, oh, what do you mean modified? Well, your feed is constantly feeding you a mixture of pre-existing viewpoints and rage bait. So you may click on reasonable people, but the next day, you're not going to see it again. You're going to see rage bait. Because the social media wants you constantly craving the next view. So if my videos do not have you craving the next video, they will find something that will. And they will feed this into a constant feedback loop where you're now constantly fed mindless drivel, boxing you into a never-ending cycle of gaga gruel, where differing opinions are not that far apart from each other. In other words, an echo chamber, where you have Hassan Piker and Asmongold going at it over and over again until the end of time, And you will never get anybody reasonable or anybody can present an objective argument. That's why they give these people hundreds of millions of dollars, because you'll say, oh, they're successful, they must be brilliant. No, they are just doing what they're algorithmically programmed to do, and they follow the trends and therefore get rewarded with views, but they don't generate profit or proceeds or any meaningful contribution. Instead, you suffer terminal brain rot because you're now in an echo chamber. If you cannot realize when you're in an echo chamber, that's where they've got you. So, and it is malicious. Facebook more so than anybody, where, again, now you can program the algorithms with the content you want, and I will guarantee you rage bait will still click through on Facebook and YouTube, not so much X. But Blue Sky, nothing but rage bait. And artificial at that. Now, the second problem is information overload. We now have the entire world's encyclopedia at our fingertips, and we look nothing up. We have an information surplus and a scarcity of use. So many rely on content moderated for them. They believe the government would never allow that. Really? Those days are gone. There hasn't been content moderation on television since the 70s. And the thing is, the people who complain the most about, the government would never allow misinformation, is the biggest producer of it. You only have to go back to Obama years. And all the arguments over misinformation and fact-checking and correcting Barry. Bolshevik Barry. Now, overwhelming volume makes it easier to change your mind over time because they overload you. So you're not changing the channel. It's constant bombardment, and eventually you shut down and start accepting that you're never going to get the truth. You can't. People can't even enjoy a sporting match anymore. It has to be my side has to win, and some teams, even when they win, they go on a rampage. Now, the third problem is cognitive bias or motivated reasoning. Psychologically today, most children are programmed to be activists at school. It starts simple, save the whales, save the hoot owl, the serpent, or whatever frog of the day, and they start reasonable, don't abuse dogs or cats. Really? What about your dear friend Hassan Piker in the shot collar? Oh, no, you can't oppress brown people. And all of a sudden, you have an overload. So they overload you with degeneracy, overload you with disagreements, overload you by calling everything Fox News or disinformation or Russian disinformation. And then they set about programming you with cognitive biases, right? Using coded language like calling Fox News reactionary, talking always about the workers and the rights of the workers. You want to help the workers, don't you? They constantly question and frame things so that eventually you have these disagreements that quickly grow out of proportion because all of a sudden you're not protecting the women, you're not protecting the children, you're not protecting the workers, therefore you must be an oppressive capitalist. So they motivated two groups to hate capitalism in return for the rewards of social media fame. So you now have people who are not able to defend themselves. You have people who are constantly smeared and vilified in the media. You have rage groups attacking them. You have cognitive dissonance where no matter what good someone does in the world, it is drowned out with noise about Epstein or censorship. And the irony is that the very rage groups that are screaming about Elon, Trump, and many others are in fact engaged in censorship. Now, we've sometimes seen a backfire effect, particularly amongst Gen Z, where you just call them racist and they say, how racist do you want me to be? Are you calling me a racist? Then I might as well be a racist. I'll be the most racist race of all racists. And they go around praising Goldfinger. And you created that problem. And the thing is, if we go back to the 1920s, it's the same thing. People going further and further left. As soon as there was pushback, I forget what they compared it all to. But yeah, people didn't know what was coming with the Bolsheviks. They do now. There's no reason to believe the communists or any of people on the left are anything other than maligned people who have ill intentions and do not say what they mean and don't mean what they say. And increasingly, more people are backfiring against it, but there's a definite cognitive bias, right? If Trump got people to hate electric cars just by praising Elon, that's cognitive bias. Motivated reasoning, communists, Hassan Piker, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Bernie Sanders, they all have motivated reasoning. They have no reason to tell you the truth because the truth would hurt their cause. Capitalism has risen more people out of poverty than anybody. And before you give me the but China argument, I'll tell you this, and you can look it up. China lowered the definition of poverty. They lied openly about their GDP. They lied about the population to get more aid than they needed. Most of the aid went into military programs. And most of the stuff on Temu is economic warfare. They sell the stuff on Temu at a loss to undermine and destroy the most basic of industries across the West so that there'll be large amounts of Western people unemployed. And they flood. And how do they subsidize it? They flood the West with precursors to fentanyl. They fund. When drug cartels have billions of dollars. Why? Because they're soft on crime. Right? The real corruption is systemic, where the system lets criminals go early, so there's lots of crime, so it drives all the white people out of neighborhoods. It destroys all the middle class. Why? So everybody's now in the union, because if you're middle class, you're not going to be in the union. You're not going to be. They want you poor, they want you desperate, they want you under their thumb, under their control. So everything out on the left is motivated to confirmation bias. That's why they have provocateurs who go around, and they never expected their provocateurs to be tracked down and arrested. But for now, we have the ACLU, we have all the evidence against millions of people. But that's the thing. How do you jail so many people for corruption? So there's a loss of trust. And as trust lowers historically, right, societies have relied on consensus built by people like scientists, journalists, and educational institutions. Then you would have public debates and forums to mediate information and establish facts using established methodology of proof. That goes all the way back to Euclid. That goes back thousands of years. But as a result of who to trust, well, it became a matter of attention, the attention economy. Watch my TV program. So they elevated serial pathetic liars, and still today worship pathetic liars like Bernstein, um, Walter Cronkite. Many of your so-called institutional journalists have no integrity. The question of who to trust. They can smear anybody. They could paint any politician because they don't have to have proof. We're living in an era now where proof doesn't matter. You have only cognitive bias. There's no trusted intermediary who steps forward and says, nope, where's the proof? Right? There was no proof in there against Nixon. Still isn't. Right? The only proof we have from the Nixon hearings was Hillary Clinton deleting 10 minutes of tape. No one talks about it. They talk about the deleted tape, but they don't add the end of the sentence was done by tampering with evidence, Hillary Clinton, which is why the whole thing was thrown out. Now, the democratization of information has been the biggest disaster in human history. You have individuals who cannot rely on their peers to tell them the truth because they're financially or politically motivated. Academic papers constantly questioning reality. You have countries that delete their history and deny it ever happened. And I'm talking about India and slavery, India and invasions of other countries. They had wars, many wars with China and Tibet. They'd lost almost every war they had. They, as a civilization, they collapsed. And they're on their way to collapse now. You may not believe it, but half the world is headed for a catastrophic economic and political collapse. And most of this caused by tribalization and polarization. With India, it's the caste system. With Russia, it's external pressure. With China, again, it's the internal caste system, the political class, the working class, and everyone else who gets exploited underneath that, whether it be the elderly, children, the unemployed. We see it when there's a rise in unemployment, a rise in prostitution, and a rise in what we say low quality product, right? You see the eventual collapse of civilization. Now, Rome took over 400 years. I think the British Empire took 120 years. I think the fall of Egypt took about 60 years, and half of that was the last 30 years. Egypt was once the jewel in the crown of the African, or particularly North Africa. They were set to outdo Saudi Arabia. And then what happened? They turned around and decided to go to war against Israel. Why? To solidarity with their Arab brothers. Now, for whatever reason, they've also had attacks on academics, particularly by religious, well, now religious majorities, but at the time religious minorities. Basically, people who just want power. They will tribalize, destroy civilization, and polarize humanity, and basically then systematically hunt down the other. And when you're trying to provide safety and social security, social bonding, and ideological unity, it provides a comfort layer where people will basically ignore reality. And we've seen that with the Nazis, we've seen that with the communists, we've seen that with the Islamists, we've seen that with the Mongols, right? Khan promised to end the war between the different tribes, and he gave each tribal leader their own equal territory and absolute harmony and rights. They had absolute right. Any minority in their territory, they could do any woman, they could do anything they pleased to in their territory. Right? Treat women like garbage. No central law, man. The only rule is no tribal fighting, and you contribute men to the Central Army to make sure that there's no tribal fighting. And so Khan built up his power and then once he had a big enough army, he systematically erased all the other leaders. He created within his new tribe social bonding over enslavement, rape, murder, torture, and the so-called creed of do what you will. And yeah, so they turned against their own tribe, their own people, their own culture. See, Mongols didn't start off and you look today, you would never think the Mongols would be like that. But I guarantee you, Khan was not the beginning. He was just the end of a long line of cultural shifts. And we're seeing cultural shifts again today with tribalism. So once you start agreeing that your tribe is superior, whether you be Charlemagne the God, Barack Obama, I'm trying to think of the third turd, Bishop Talib or whatever he is, or Al Sharpton, you have people who preach unity, but only for their tribe, conformity and social bonding only for their tribe, and ideological unity only for their tribe, and you eventually polarize society, and then you have the inevitable teen takeovers. They are a product of tribalism. They're the inevitable. They are the cultural revolution where they are chasing out the others to turn everything into a zone they control. And the thing is, Mao didn't invent it. Genghis Khan did. Everything comes down from Genghis Khan. Every world leader who's been a brutal dictator has copied the rise of Genghis Khan. But with every rise of Khan sees the fall of Khan. Because eventually, even your own people want peace. And if you can't deliver, which none of them can, right, you may be able to hold it together, but every empire needs an enemy. So eventually, when you run out of enemies, you tribalize internally yet again and start taking on each other. Islam is predominantly the Mongol Empire that has absorbed the Christianity, the Kazakh Judaism, and I forget the third. I'm thinking Zonterianism, but I can't be certain because there are different arguments about how Islam really came to be. But by the time the Mongols settled in Jerusalem, and started creating a new religion, they had started to fragment. Most of the Middle East comes from the Far East. Most of the Middle East it was desert because every war they had, they would set fire to the crops. And this goes back to Babylon, from when the fall of Babylon, the Akkadian Wars. They burnt crop after crop. And after 4 generations, Babylon went from being the green sea of grass to a wasteland, burnt and discarded. There are several points in history where Babylon is almost unrecognizable. It is completely devoid of most people, but there was once upon a time, it was green, it was flourishing, it once had it was one of the first cities to reach 1 million people in populace. It was bigger than Rome. And they were more productive. They had built superior waterways. But because tribalism relies on violence and violent methodologies, such as raiding, raping, and pillaging, it is tribalism. All collectivism comes down from Genghis Khan. All communism. Now, liberalism splits off and sort of hovers between the two. It tries to be the best of both worlds. And if you really want to know what liberalism is about, I hate to tell you this, but Vladimir Putin's more liberal than any American liberal right now, except for maybe Bill Maher, which is scary. But Bill Maher, in his older years, is now becoming more and more centrist. This is what liberalism truly is about. Liberalism and libertarianism, and do meet in the middle. But with liberalism, you always have this pure academic bias. They are not consensus builders where they mediate information to establish facts. No, they establish facts based on what gives them power and political bias. So if they want to leave out the fact that we've known for hundreds of years about the supernatural world and that the vast majority of us walk around disbelieving because we don't encounter it, the chances of you encountering any form of supernatural event, I think, is like 1 in 10 million or something. You got to consider Project Blue Book to document some of these. 400 events out of 120 million people. 400 events over 20 years. The chances of corroborating evidence was very difficult indeed, considering that even today, when there are large populations that see stuff like the lights over Phoenix, no one will come to consensus what it is because they can't explain it, therefore they want to dismiss it or call it aliens. They want to make stuff up rather than say, you know what, I don't know what it is, I'll document it, and more people can research and add to that information and will reach a consensus over time for establishing facts. No, people don't think like that. Brain hurt. Must make up story. Or people will think I'm an idiot. No, people already think you're an idiot. Your tribalism, your polarization proves that. It is profoundly difficult to reach common ground across different groups. This has always been historically true. Even in Rome, when they tried to unite 7 tribes, it took 120 years for Rome to go from city to state. Then a few decades ago from state to nation. Now, a nation is multiple states with a common government. And that was only, a quarter of Italy? And it took another century to take all of Italy. Now, some joined voluntarily. And this is where Pax Roma started to develop. I think this is where Cicero and other politicians rose to prominence, arguing about peaceful, a war on war, a peaceful expansion of the empire to create a common army across the board. Now, this was before Khan, but why does all these dictatorships derive from Khan and not Rome? Well, because liberals always undermined Rome. They undermined Rome. They destroyed Rome. So they can't model themselves after which they destroy because they know they would turn around against them. That's why they like democracy and not the republic. They undermine every republic. It's mob rule, right? And you may say, oh, but Dave, the Greek scholars were before that. Yes, the Greek scholars, absolutely. Why can't took all these things in, whether it be the Islamic scholars from Baghdad, right? Most of the Greek scholars didn't flee to Rome; they fled to Baghdad and India. And this is where Khan learnt from for whatever reason, he kept someone alive. They told him stories. The stories that you know as Arabian Nights actually started with Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan is the leader that was being serenaded by a woman to stay alive, and she told him all these stories. It made him a better dictator, and that's why he kept her alive. All these stories taught him how to be meaner, how to be more manipulative, how to create social cohesion within his empire and his tribes, and he went around with his grand army and annihilated, well, he thought he had, all the opposition. That's why with the, you might have heard the stories about the unification of China, where they just went around killing all the central leaders, and then forming government in Xi'an. That was all backed by Khan. That was Khan's son. The unification of China was actually done by Mongols, and then centuries later they rebelled against the Mongols. The last Khan died in was it Baghdad or Tehran? I can't remember which, but he died blind and a blind old man, and he was around the time of the beginning of Islamic scholars, and he was probably the first Muslim leader, and he was the one who blessed the new empire, the new caliphate, to go forth and conquer the old. So that's why the Islamic spread was mainly east, not west. It was trying to unite Khan's old empire. So tribalism has predominantly dominated the world for so long that it's very hard to shake it. Now, you may think globalism changes that. It doesn't. It uses the same tactics as Khan to create liberalism, to create a new tribe, whether it be America, which failed to take over the world, so they created communism. And so every time liberalism fails, it reinvents itself. It finds a new host. It builds new tribes offering safety, social bonding, and ideological unity, like Antifa. And ultimately, you cannot have objective truth if your only truth is power. So this is why the Red Pill movement is so maligned, and and they turn women against it, calling us all incels. So immediately you have a social pressure not to engage in a relationship with someone who is outside of the approved consensus, which is leading to more and more people unhappy, more and more people feeling pressured, and more people lying flat. And now the large number of women who are joining the lying flat movement is spreading. And again, there are more people, about 3/4 of the people who lie flat are across Southeast Asia and southern China, but it is spreading to a global movement now, where people are just saying, you know what, the elites are corrupt, the unions are corrupt, the police are corrupt, the army's corrupt, all the leadership is corrupt, so we are not going to participate, we're going to let it rot, and so it goes from lying flat to letting it rot, and eventually, yes, there's no truth, that people aren't interested in truth, and that's where things really will begin to fall apart. So if academics don't pull their head out of their ass and stop pulling this trying to create consensus on trans and other issues, trying to sell us that, we've still got to stop eating meat and all these other things. No, there are more important issues than your feelings. Okay? If someone doesn't like eating meat, so what? You're free not to eat meat. It's the fact that they ram it down other people's throat. And I'm telling you, it's not going to end well for vegans. It's not going to end well for communists. It never does. It always ends in self-destruction. And we're watching it now. Right? There's still that part of the world where craftsmanship and it was meaningful, but World War II was actually the root cause of the collapse, because it was mass production versus craftsmanship. It was objective truths and protection of nationhood versus internationalism and free trade, free movement, and neo-tribalism, or neoliberalism, what do you mean call it? Neo-colonialism. Now we're living in the era of neo-colonialism, where India is trying to pretend it's not a colonial power, yet dumps millions of people into other countries and then has them all run for government. China's the same. They're all fighting to dominate the world with overpopulation. And the problem is populations can become very exhaustive very quickly. It happened with Rome, it happened with Babylon, it happened with Egypt. And ironically enough, it happened with some of the Africans. So there is no one event that you can say does not reoccur. History repeats. That seems to be the only mantra the elites have. Now, whether you're not, I think Red Pill is a movement to break the mold, because it's never been before an attempted revolution based on truth. Every revolution is always based on feelings, propaganda, or creating a new tribe, new tribalism. So the reason why we don't have truth is power, right? If people stop rewarding liars with power, right? So, and I don't mean general elections. You have to go to the selection process. You have to go through academics. You have to go through schools. You have to be able to question and have absolute objective truth. Instead, what we have is greed, envy, sloth, people, particularly sloth. So where do we go from here? More people will basically, once there's enough people outside of the system, the system will, a new system arises, because the old system can't sustain itself. That's what happens. Once we stop rewarding liars, they can't survive. We all reach a point. I mean, Jeff Bezos reached a point where he couldn't manage Amazon. It was too big. He had too many people carrying it in different directions. He had the fund managers and all the others who just wanted to turn it into a cash cow. Whatever vision he had, he'd lost long ago. And so, yeah. And I guess a lot of people don't understand, but a lot of people like him thought the left was going to produce a kinder, compassionate world. It didn't. They're always, right? It's, I forget the name of it, but you know what? You know, like saying white people have no culture is because you're so immersed in the culture, because you don't know what culture is. Like, culture's Beethoven. Culture produced Beethoven, Shakespeare. It produced the jury system, a written language, a written codex of law and constitutions created. It produced a society where merit, where you're able to build a business and your merit takes you as far as you're capable. Instead, we have people who see someone else succeed and say, well, I can't succeed, I've got to tear it down. So that ultimately is why we have no truth, because there are so many people who get no punishment for being envious. So thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please support the channel. I really appreciate a like, and if you can, a share, and really go the extra mile and support me either on Ko-Fi, Patreon, buy my books, buy my merch. Hey, you can do more than one thing, you know. And all my links are in the link tree description below, in my profile. Scan the QR code on the screen. I really appreciate each and every one of you if you've gotten this far. See you in the next video, and bye for now.